The first time I really remember being at a funeral was at my grandma Buster's funeral. We all gathered at a funeral home in Iowa where she was living before she died. Relatives that I hadn't seen for years lined up to walk past her body, which was laid out on one side of the room. My mom and I used to joke that we didn't particularly understand open casket funerals because people walk past, stare at the body, and remark at how nice the person looks. Imagine my surprise then when my mother walked past my grandmother lying in her casket and turned to me to say, "She looks so nice." At that same funeral, my dad got up to speak. He was the youngest of Grandma Buster's children, and he was a little nervous about giving the eulogy. He didn't want to start crying in front of everyone. And I told him, "Don't worry, just look into my eyes and I'll help you get through it." He got to a particularly poignant part of his script, took a deep breath, and found my eyes in the crowd. I was sobbing. I was no help at all. He took a big gulp and continued. The point of my story is that we don't always know how to act when it comes to death, and especially end of life celebrations like funerals and wakes. What's the proper protocol? Can we show emotion or not? What are we supposed to say? And wouldn't it be nice if we could just hire someone to do all of that decision making for us? Well, my guest today, Lynn Perez, does just that. Welcome to Before You Go, the official podcast of ABODE Contemplative Care for the Dying. At ABODE, our mission is that we live in a world where death is not feared, and we live fully until we die. And we'd like to make that happen before we go. I'm Natalie Buster, yoga, volunteer, and doula director at ABODE in San Antonio, Texas. Welcome to Before You Go. Lynn is the founder of the Parting Planner, an end-of-life celebration and memorial event planning service. She's an end-of-life doula and serves on the board at ABODE. She's also currently studying to become a funeral director. And in her spare time, she runs the Death Cafe, which we hold once a month at ABODE. Welcome, Lynn. Lynn, how are you? It's so good to see you.
Yes, you too. I'm so good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm wonderful. For those of you who don't know, Lynn and we love podcasting. This is one of our favorite things to do. So I'm so happy that you're on this podcast with us.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah. So you are a multi-hyphenate. It's pretty exciting. I had to I think catch my breath when I was saying all of the different things that you do and that you do well here in San Antonio. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Parting Planner. And this is an organization that you have created, which helps people through end of life celebrations and memorial services. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely, I can. Um, so the parting planner is unique in that all I do is plan celebration of life and memorial events from the event planning side. This is a very new industry, a new, niche, if you will, of the event planning industry. Um, And it is I mean, it's just one of those things that just, sits in your heart. Going in and helping a family take care of logistics, take care of the details so that they can just be and they don't have to worry about did the food get delivered, who's going to cue the music. I come in and I do all of that.
What got you on this path? Like, what encouraged you to start such a business?
I have a corporate planning background. It sounds silly to say this, but I've planned, birthday parties. I planned my own wedding. Those seem like very small things, but people who plan events like that just kind of can capture the details and they know how to do it. Um, so I had that in my background. I also had funeral planning in my background, unfortunately. funeral planning for family members and going through that. When my father-in-law passed, I realized that there was a need for somebody to come in and just take care of the details. It was the first time that I was in a family that didn't everybody didn't just jump in and take care of everything. That's kind of how my family works, but that's not how things were working on this side. And I mean, it made perfect sense, right? Everybody, everyone's devastated. You're dealing with grief. You don't want to deal with all the other little things. So during that time, I jumped in and said, okay, what needs to be done? Let me do it. So we went through that, and that is where I realized somebody needs to be doing this. At that time, I started researching online. Is anybody doing this? And I found very few people who are doing it. One of the people who's really like leading the industry, Christina of New Narrative, she has been amazing, a wonderful mentor. I've watched her expand, and she's probably the most successful event planner who does this out there. Um, but there's not a lot of us. And so, yeah, that's kind of where it started.
I can imagine that the people who hire you are so grateful for the services that you provide. You mentioned that, at this time, people are undergoing unbelievable grief and bereavement. It's hard to make decisions. It's hard to even like decide, what to eat and what to wear and how
Right.
to get one foot in front of the other. And so having someone like you come in and say, okay, I got this. I got all the logistics. You just honor this person that you love.
Yes. Yes. And my first major client, I had done some smaller things, but my first major client, when I went through full planning of her son's memorial, I knew that I was doing the right thing. I knew that this is absolutely the place I needed to be, and that people truly, truly needed this.
I wonder if you can share with me a little bit because, some of the many things that you do, you're a board member at Abode. How would you say that this work that you do with the parting planner melds or marries with the work that you do as a board member at Abode and how the two visions and missions can work together?
I think that, at Abode, we are supporting people at the end of life. We are supporting the people who maybe don't have the family, their family doesn't have the capacity to care for them. And as a parting planner, I'm supporting the families, right? In the end, on both sides, it's about how do we make this really crappy situation better? How do we lift some of that grief, lift some of that burden? We can't take the emotion away in either place, right? We can't do that, but we can be there to support, families of people who are passing the best that we can. So those are really my focus is always it's not about me. It's not about, you know, the navigators. It's truly about the people who are passing and their families.
And it's in both places, you're holding that space for them. At Abode, we take care of, all the logistics, the cleaning, the feeding, the comfort care, so that family members can just come in and love on their person. And it sounds to me like the parting planner and this organization that you run, you do the same thing for people who want to celebrate.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can share with us just, an example of how your work has really benefited others.
So I will go back to this, first major full service event that I did. The woman who called me, her son had passed away, and her husband was, had been diagnosed with cancer, and he was not doing well. And so, she said, I'm taking care of my husband. This is happening. I just can't do it all alone. And I said, okay, no worries. I'll come in. She had another son. He was out of town, so he wasn't there to, help her with all the details. And, I came in, created programs, scanned pictures, put together the order of service, um, brought in the vendors, priced out all her vendors. Um, and she was able to just be with the husband, right? They were going through this horrible thing on top of the husband being sick. And I didn't want her to worry about the details. Don't worry about those details. And in the end, I mean, she looked at me and she gave me a hug and she said, I don't know how I would have done this without you. This was just incredible. I just had to be here and you took care of everything.
Mm, what a beautiful gift. I mean, just a beautiful gift, the presence and the time for people to grieve and that you
Right.
can hold them in that way with your service. Have you seen, I'm curious, have you seen this start to change or like since when you started providing these services as the parting planner? Do you see a trend in what people are looking for when they celebrate their loved one? Have you seen those trends change?
I
And if
do.
so, in what way?
Yeah, I do. So this has, been my belief is that there is a change happening in the funeral industry. I've heard people say that they don't think that that's happening, that it's going to stay very traditional. But I can tell you, based on my generation who is planning their parents', funerals, that we don't want to do it traditionally. We don't want it to be a somber event. We want it to be celebratory, right? We want to truly honor this person and honor this person with the foods they loved, the music they loved. Um, so I feel like there is a shift in the funeral industry. And so that's, where I jumped in and wanted to be part of that, because I do see those changes. Um, Burial used to be the typical disposition, right? People wanted to be buried. Now there are so many other options, cremation being one of them. With cremations, I think that just opens you up to so many more options when it comes to um, hosting an event. I did an event not too long ago and it was at a garden bar in a hotel downtown. And it was beautiful, completely different than what somebody might think is typical of a funeral, but people can do it however they want.
Mhm. Yeah, they can bring their creativity and really honor the person in the way that the person wants to be honored.
Yeah,
My memories of funerals of my grandparents, they're usually at a funeral home, and this is what people did, but it was very formal, like you said, and I think that this starts to get me thinking of, I don't have to just subscribe to that formality anymore. And it seems like the trends are in my favor. There are a lot of other options and a lot of other things that one can do to celebrate their loved ones. When do you see people start to think about this? Do you see people like loved ones waiting until after the death or when the person is very close to death? Or do you start to see a shift of people wanting to plan that end of life celebration earlier than we've seen in the past?
so I have seen a lot of people starting to have more conversations around death and dying. As you mentioned, I facilitate Death Cafe at Abode. And for people who don't know what Death Cafe is, it's just a discussion around death, dying, all of the things. It's a very informal discussion. Um, there's not, a set agenda or timeline. I think the only requirement is we have to have cake.
I love
Let's
it.
Yes, let's be respectful. Let's have cake and let's talk about the things. And so I have found with these discussions, people are they want to talk about it. And actually what I see is that a lot of people want to talk about their parents, talk to their parents. They want their parents to have this conversation. They want to start making decisions so things are not so hard later. So I see that shift. And I also see n- a personal example is my mom. When my mom came home on hospice, the first days that she was home, we really didn't talk too much about it. And then a couple days in, she said, "Okay, let me tell you, this is what I want." My mom picked out songs for her funeral. My mom picked out what she wanted to wear. My mom picked out what she wanted to eat, she wanted people to eat at her funeral. I mean, it was, um, she wanted to make those decisions. And she, put some traditions in there, some traditional things, which I think there's absolutely a place for that. And the people who want to go the traditional route, it's wonderful. They should. Um, but she did a lot of like non-traditional things. And so I definitely think that people are getting a little more comfortable having the discussions. That's definitely one of the things that I try to encourage people to do, have discussions about death and dying, make it something that's easy to talk about in your home. And then once you do that, they'll be a little bit easier later.
Oh, that's such a great point. And I think having the discussions now, like you facilitate at Abode with the Death Cafe, and what we're trying to do here with this podcast is just get that conversation going so that people know that they can start thinking about these types of things at any time. And especially something like an end of life celebration. I mean, you I know personally, I would want it very specially curated that could accurately depict my life.
Right.
It's almost like a wedding in a lot of ways, the
Yeah.
type of organization and planning that goes into it.
Yeah. Very much so. When I introduce what I do to people, sometimes they say that, oh, like wedding planner. I said, very much like a wedding planner in the logistical sense, but not so much like a wedding planner in I'm going to bombard the family with details. If you think about it, wedding planners, typical brides, I think, want all the details. Like, what are you doing? When are we doing this? I want to know everything. Well, in this situation, the family doesn't want you to bombard them with details. Um, you have to be very flexible in that. But
Yeah, that's so great. I love that difference between the 2 and also the similarities, and I find that with something that's as unique as what you provide, having that, well, it's like this, but a little
yeah,
different. Kind of a starting point, a conversation starter. I wonder, Lynn, if you could share with me, what the people that you've served, what they've taught you about life, yourself, and what's truly important.
the people that I have served, the families that I have served, have really done me a service by opening up, right? They're bringing me into their most intimate thing that's happening in their life. And they let me learn every aspect of this person. I mean, here are the pictures from when this person was born. Here are their favorite songs. Here are all of the things. And as much as I've learned from those people, how strong they are, how strong the family is, I've learned so much about the people who've passed. And what I've learned from them is that the way that you live your life will come back and be reflected in your service, your funeral, whatever event it is. I was at an event where we were celebrating this gentleman who had passed, and it was the most beautiful event. And it really taught me to live your life, like live your life fully. Don't hold back from the things that you want to do because you only have one. And the manager of the event center came out and she said, "Oh my God, what a beautiful service." And, all these people honoring him. And I didn't know that people did this. And I said, "Well, not everybody gets a service like this." this man got this service because of the person he was. And so really that just tells me, you know, be the best version of yourself. Be good to others and I mean, be somebody that you want people to miss, I
That's
guess,
a
right?
really good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Earn this celebration, you know? I mean, he probably had a whole bunch of people there,
Oh my
people
god,
who
it was
loved him, who
beautiful.
were gonna miss
Mhm.
him, and that was such a reflection of the type of life that he led.
Right, right.
What are some of the challenges that you face doing this kind of work and that have tested you throughout these different, offerings that you provide?
Of course, time. Typically with something like this, people are trying to do it right away. I've been very fortunate that I've had some families come in and say, you know what, I'm not prepared to do this week. I need to do this in a month. Okay, that's perfect. That's much better for me. Um, One of the other challenges is just people not understanding what I do. And so for me to make calls to event centers or caterers and explain, like, well, I'm the event planner for this. Um, and they're like, what? What do
Wait,
you mean
for what
you're from the funeral home?
now?
Like, there's always a lot of
Yeah.
questions, like, who are you exactly? Um, and that's okay, right? There's not many of us, right? So that makes sense.
Yeah.
The other thing, of course, is trying to separate myself from the emotions that this work brings. I'm sure you can relate to that as, an end of life doula and somebody who's really in this space. It's very trying and it's very heavy. And that is definitely the hardest part, but also the part that makes it so special. And so I've learned there's some practices I have in place to really separate myself and say, yes, this is sad for you, but this is not your grief. Yeah, this is somebody else's grief, and you're helping them with that. And that's really helped me make that separation.
That's a really great way to think about it. Like, this is not my thing to hold. I'm
Right.
helping someone hold theirs. And so there's a little bit of boundary setting just with that statement.
Yes.
How else do you fill your cup? I mean, you're very busy. You have, I think I've got 4 kids with a toddler as well, and
5.
5 kids total.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how do you keep yourself, replenished and keep your cup full?
I surround myself with a lot of positive people, a lot of people who encourage me, love on me. Um, that's I mean, honestly, that's the main that's the main thing. And I really just appreciate my family. I appreciate, this life that I have. I appreciate doing the parting planner work and doing work at Abode, just embracing that and surrounding yourself in this space. I think that's what fills you up, really.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
sounds like it. You're one of the most positive people I know. I love every time we get to spend together because you are one of those positive people for me.
Oh,
Yeah, and I think it's also when you are in the death world like we are, you start to realize how precious life is and
absolutely.
how much there is to celebrate and
Yes.
be grateful for. Gosh, this is fun. I could talk there's so much to talk to you about, but I definitely wanted to focus on the parting planner. If people wanna find you, what's the best or learn more about your work, what's the best way that they can do that?
Sure. I am on all the social media platforms as the partying planner, and also my website is thepartyingplanner.com. There's, my contact information. I have some pricing on my website. So that's usually the best way to get a hold of me.
One thing we ask all of our guests on this podcast, what do you want to do before you go?
Before I go, And this is very related to the timing. Before I go, I want to become a funeral director.
Well, there you go. You're well on your way to that.
Yes. Yes.
That's good. Yeah, I think before I go, I want to get ahead of my party planning. There's a lot in my life to celebrate, and just knowing that you exist with this organization that you've created puts me at ease. Okay, it doesn't have to be the way things have always been. I can create my own celebration now
Yeah.
while I can think about the things that are important to me and just make sure I have someone who can make all those happen after I go.
Yes, absolutely you can.
All right. Well, Lynn, thank you so much for your time. I know you're so busy, and I so appreciate you sitting down and talking with me on our podcast for season 2 of Before You
Yay!
Go.
Yes, thank you, Natalie. Thank you for having me.
This episode is brought to you by ABODE's Death Cafe. Our objective is to increase awareness of death with a view to helping people make the most of their finite lives. To learn more about Death Cafe, go to abodehome.org. Wow, wasn't that something? Like, to know that people like Lynn exist in this world, not only does she feel comfortable talking about death and dying, she's really good at encouraging other people to talk about their own mortality. And what I think that really helps with is things like this, like planning for the inevitable. I mean, none of us get out of here alive. And so, how wonderful to know that there is an organization like the Parting Planner where you could work with someone like Lynn to make that end of life celebration exactly as you want it. And do it now, right? Don't leave it for your friends and relatives to try and guess and figure out what you want, but like choose your music. Like I love what Lynn was saying about her mom. You know, she kept a lot of the formal aspects of a typical funeral, but she also was able to weave in her own likes and desires and favorite things, favorite foods that she wanted everyone to eat, and favorite music that she wanted played. And I think that's just so nice to hear. It's so important to know that we can have agency over that final story that's told about us and our lives. And so, like I said to Lynn, before I go, I want to get on that end of life planning. We've talked a lot about in our last season about all the different things that are important to get in front of before you go, before we go. And I think this is one of them. I think being able to plan that party, that final big party. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Before You Go, the official podcast of Abode Contemplative Care for the Dying. At Abode, we believe death is not a medical event, and we are not medical professionals. We're just sharing our opinions, and these opinions shouldn't be taken as medical advice. You can find us online on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. This episode was edited by Make Your Day Richer.